Yeah, and then I got thrown off Zoom. But anyway, okay. So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz writes that if a person should view a situation that may cause anger as an opportunity to exercise restraint and calm, and thank Hashem for giving him the opportunity to do so. The Gemara in Eruvin 54b relates the story of Rav Preda, who had a student who was very slow and needed to be taught the same material 400 before he grasped it. On one occasion, the student lost his concentration, and Rav Preda needed to repeat the material 800 times before the student grasped it. For this, Rav Preda was rewarded from Shemaim. He lived an extra 400 years and merited the will to come for himself and his entire generation. From whence did Rav Preda derive this patience? How did Rav Preda sacrifice his own advancement for one student? Rav Shmulevitz suggests that Rav Preda viewed teaching a slow student as an opportunity to hone his skills of patience and forbearance, so highly valued and rewarded by Hashem. Okay. So patience is a virtue.
I don't want to blow Damon's horn, but Damon sometimes has to repeat stuff about 80 times to us. So well done, Damon. You're in the right direction.
He still remains
You're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
And you remain patient for those 80 times.
Thanks.
So it's back to you.
Thank you, guys. Listen, the truth of it is maybe I'm not giving it over properly, and that's what's often gone through my head. But thank you, and I hope you all had a wonderful Shabbat. It was actually kind of cold, and with load shedding, the heat intermittently comes on and off. But I felt sorry. I was walking last night in Schottenstein, okay, and there was a guy on the street with a blanket curled up and sleeping, and I just want to tell you how lucky we are.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it was like the towels were so cold that you put your hand, they went numb. And he was lying with a blanket and just sleeping. He slept under the street light so that he wouldn't get mugged. So can you imagine sleeping in ice cold, your head's exposed to the light so that you don't get mugged? And you're half sleeping and half awake because you think somebody's going to take the only blanket in your possession. We are very, very lucky, guys. I'm serious. We're very, very blessed.
But we are lucky.
Yeah, so with that opportunity, I'd like to thank Kevin for teaching us and just tell you where we left off. We basically had two opinions. There's the opinion of Rav Yochanan, who said that Rabbi Shimon's ruling refers to where the thief slaughters unblemished offerings inside the temple courtyard, not for the sake of the original owner, and therefore the thief owes the 4 or 5-fold payment because the original owner didn't get benefit from the sacrifice. Okay? That's Rav Yochanan's opinion on Rabbi Shimon, according to Ravin. Okay. Now, if you have a look, there is Reish Lakish's opinion, which is obviously slightly different, which says that he says Rabbi Shimon is referring to where the thief actually slaughtered a blemished offering outside the temple courtyard. And since that's the only place you can slaughter a blemished offering, he still owes the original owner the 4 or 5-fold payment because it's a fit slaughter, meaning it's the right way to slaughter for consumption, even though it's not for consecration, and therefore he still owes the original owner the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? Then you remember there was this issue where basically, according to Rabbi Shimon, that it was blood that was thrown on an altar. Sorry, well, it means that basically if blood was going to, if any blood stands to be thrown on the altar, should I say, it's considered as if it was already thrown. And if anything stands to be redeemed, it's considered as if it was already redeemed. Okay? So that's his default position, whether it happens or not, which means that means that the thief is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. So where did Rabbi Shimon get this? There was a brisa, as we know, on Nosar, which is sacrificial meat that was left over and not consumed within the time allotted for its consumption. Obviously, that meat can't be used. It has to be burnt, and it can't derive any benefit. So we're saying that we were just bringing that principle of the fact that some also gets food tumah, some does not. And the basic principle was that if there was time to shech the animal before Shabbat came, no, not before Shabbat, before evening came in, and the blood had time to be spilt on the altar, then it had a moment of fitness to be used on the Mizbeach, and therefore it was susceptible to food tumah. Even after you couldn't render benefit for actual consumption, compared to a case where a person slaughtered the animal just before sunset, and there was no time to throw the blood on the altar, which means there was never a moment that was fit for being put onto the altar. And in that particular case, the food in an earthenware container, if it wasn't eaten by nightfall, can't contract food tumah by being in an earthenware container that gets tumah, simply because it never had a moment where it was fit for benefit if it was eaten before sunset, and therefore it's not even considered food. So we learn from this basically a principle of any blood that stands to be thrown on the altar is considered as if it was already thrown. But where do we learn that anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was already redeemed? That's the issue that we're dealing with now. Okay. And we basically said that if you look at the meat of a slaughtered paraduma, which is a red heifer, from which it is forbidden to derive benefit, it conveys food tumah, which means obviously, guys, there had to have been a moment of fitness at which you could consume it. And where was that point? Well, if you have a look on the, according to Reish Lakish, Rav Shimon was one to say a paraduma may be redeemed after it was slaughtered upon its wood pyre. So they basically put wood there. It was a designated place on the Mount of Olives, and basically it faces the portals of the temple. That's in Numbers chapter 19, verse 4. So it's a wide pit, would be dug in that place. A wood pyre would be arranged in the pit, obviously so that it would be flammable, and the cow was slaughtered and burnt on it. So Rabbi Shimon maintains that even after the paraduma was slaughtered on its pyre, in accordance with the halachic requirement, it can be redeemed, as long as, if a nicer paraduma is found, as long as you haven't spilt the blood then on the for the purification process then. So if it had a moment at which it could be redeemed and eaten, etc., that's what we're talking about here. So therefore, since it stands to be redeemed, it's considered as if it was redeemed and rendered fit for consumption, even though it wasn't actually redeemed and remains prohibited for benefit. In other words, even though we don't actually make use of it, because any paraduma, they were very rare, even if you found a better one out of respect for the animal, it's still something that isn't treated as the mundane. So evidently Rabbi Shimon holds that anything that stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was redeemed. And that's obviously the proof for it. So what does this mean? It means that if the thief slaughtered a stolen blemished offering outside the temple courtyard, he's liable to the full fivefold payment, because although the slaughter itself doesn't actually render the meat fit for consumption until the animal is redeemed, since at the time of slaughter the animal stands to be redeemed, according to Rabbi Shimon, he still applies the principle because of whatever stands to be redeemed is considered as if it was already redeemed. So the meat is considered fit for consumption. And obviously, guys, by extension, the slaughter is considered a slaughter that is fit. And that's what renders the thief liable to the full-fold or five-fold payment. Okay? So that's straightforward. There's a difference between what is eligible for being put on the altar and eligible for kashrut purposes in eating it. There's still full fivefold payment as far as that's concerned. Okay, so let's go on to the next portion. The last 2 weeks, you guys have done exceptionally well. We've done a daf a week. So that is very, very good news. Okay. So last week we did a daf, and the week before we did a daf in record time. So well done. Okay, so now having clarified Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish's respective interpretations of Rabbi Shimon's ruling in the Mishnah, that one who steals and slaughters an offering for which the owner is responsible pays the fourfold or fivefold penalty, the Gemara guys is going to examine why each one rejected the interpretation of another. Okay. All right. So, it's understandable why Rav Yochanan does not say as Reish Lakish does, because Rav Yochanan wished to interpret Rabbi Shimon's ruling in the Mishnah as applying to even unblemished offerings. Okay? So what he was saying, and obviously certainly to blemished kodashim that were slaughtered outside. Okay, so do you remember Rav Yochanan's premise, guys? He was saying that obviously for unblemished offerings that are slaughtered inside the temple courtyard, that's a fit slaughter and is eligible for the thief to pay a fourfold or fivefold payment, because according to Ravin's explanation of Rav Yochanan, the thief did it for his own selfish purposes, not for the original owner. But Reish Lakish is saying, look, it only pertains to blemished kodashim that were slaughtered outside. And we want to know, well, why does he only consider that the case? So the Gemara answers, Rav Lakish would say to you, the Torah states with respect to the fourfold or fivefold payment, he uses the term, obviously, in Shmot, chapter 21, verse 37. It has a juxtaposition, okay, and it says, and slaughters it or sells it. So when you juxtapose the word slaughter and selling, the verse indicates a comparison between the two acts. Wherever the stolen animal is subject to the law of sale, it is subject to the law of slaughter. But whenever it's not subject to the law of sale, it's not subject to the law of slaughter. So in other words, wherever the thief would be liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for selling the stolen animal, he is liable to the penalty for slaughtering it. Do you remember this is not the first time Reish Lakish uses that comparison, where the two have to be homogeneous? Do you remember we learned it before? Just like with a sale, there has to be a buyer. As far as he's concerned, when there's a slaughter, there has to be an agent that helps him slaughter. Because as Gavin asked me the other day, does it mean that every thief knows how to do a proper shechting? Not necessarily. So he's saying that there's a partner. In order to have a seller, you need a buyer. In order to have an animal shechted, you need two people. Animal's big, and there's expertise involved. So he's saying often that it's a case where, in this case as well, anything that's ineligible for you to have a full fivefold payment with regards to the slaughter is ineligible for you to have a full fivefold payment with regard to a sale. So what I'm saying is, as Kevin taught us, a treifa, Kevin, you remember you said a treifa, you can't get benefit from. And therefore, since there's no benefit, Reish Lakish and obviously Rav Yochanan interpret Rabbi Shimon as saying that as far as the slaughtering is concerned, you're not going to pay the four or fivefold payment as a thief. Why? Because you can't use the animal. That animal isn't a kosher shchita, and it's certainly not kosher for consecration. So since there's no benefit, there's no full fivefold payment on the slaughter. There's only the twofold payment from the theft. So what Reish Lakish is saying here, whenever an animal is rendered unfit for slaughter, like a treifa, you can't pay the four or fivefold payment if you sell a treifa either, because of the juxtaposition of the verse, if he sells or slaughters. Does everybody understand Reish Lakish's position? Rav Yochanan doesn't interpret Rabbi Shimon in that manner. He said just because something's unfit for slaughter doesn't mean you can't sell it. Okay, so basically since if you sell an unblemished offering, it doesn't constitute a sale, they're not subject to the laws of slaughter either. So all it's saying is, look, as far as unblemished kedoshim are concerned, the reason why Reish Lakish is talking about an animal that's slaughtered and blemished outside the temple courtyard, which is actually kosher. It has to be redeemed, but you can do something with that animal. You can then shecht it and eat it. You've got to redeem it with another animal because it developed a blemish, etc. But the reality is, at that point, you can consume the animal. And since you can get benefit and consume it, the thief would have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment because the original owner didn't get the benefit to consume it. You get that, guys? But Reish Lakish doesn't say that, as far as he's concerned, that you can consider an animal that's actually in the temple and unblemished. The reason being, is that he's saying that any animal. Let me put it like this: is that unblemished kodashim, they can't be deconsecrated, okay, and rendered chulin. In other words, they have to be shechted and taken to the Beit HaMikdash. And if you can't render them chulin, then there's no benefit that you could have personally from it, and therefore you don't pay a 4 or 5-fold penalty on it. Therefore, you can't sell it either. Okay, so therefore, Rabbi Shimon must be referring to blemished kodashim, which can be redeemed and deconsecrated. And once it's redeemed and deconsecrated, you can sell it. And that's where the 4 or 5-fold payment can apply, both in the case of the sale and the slaughter, according to Rashi. That's how Reish Lakish understands it. So Reish Lakish limits Rabbi Shimon's ruling to blemished kodashim that are subject to both sale and slaughter. And Rav Yochanan, who extends Rabbi Shimon's ruling even to unblemished kodashim, which are not subject to sale. So obviously the one is saying, in a certain case, you have to, if it's an unfit slaughter and there's no 4-fold payment or 5-fold payment, you can still pay the 4 or 5-fold payment on the sale because you're able to sell it. Reish Lakish interprets Rabbi Shimon as saying that basically if you can't pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty because it's not fit for slaughter like a treifa, or an unblemished animal that has to be sacrificed in the temple courtyard because you can't get benefit, then you don't get benefit. So there's no, as a thief, 4 or 5-fold payment for the slaughter, as far as that's concerned. And therefore, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment on the sale because you can't sell what you can't get benefit from in slaughtering. Is that clear, guys, before we move on?
So, so the thief isn't subject to the 4 or 5-fold payment, you're saying?
According to whom?
I don't know. My mind's not 100% yet tonight.
No,
so
that's okay. That's not a problem. So I'm saying, can you just explain to me, firstly, both of them are interpreting Rabbi Shimon. So can you explain to me, Kev, let's start off with the first process. Can you explain to me what Rav Yochanan's view is? Okay, let's start off and say, well, where does Rav Yochanan say the animal is slaughtered?
In the courtyard, temple courtyard.
Yes. Why? Because it's
unblemished.
Correct. And therefore it's eligible, it's basically susceptible to being consecrated. You can't unconsecrate it. And since you can't, that can't be deconsecrated, therefore you can't eat it. It's not considered chulin. So since you can't get benefit from it, as a thief, you wouldn't pay the 4 or 5-fold payment on it. Do you get it?
Okay, because if the thief benefits and he must make good, he must. Okay, so then what? He only pays the 2. He only pays the penalty.
No. But he pays the 4 or 5-fold for a different reason, actually. does.
Oh, so this is
it,
not for this reason.
No, he pays it because he got the benefit of consecrating the animal, which the original owner didn't. So in other words, he stole that from the original owner. So since he got the benefit not of eating it, but of consecrating it, he owes the original owner the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? Whereas Reish Lakish sees it almost like a treifa, is that you can't get benefit from it personally. And therefore, since you can't get benefit from it personally, it's unfit for slaughter. So he's talking then and saying that it's a blemished animal, and therefore you can only slaughter it outside the temple courtyard, and then you do get benefit from it. You can eat it. And therefore, in that case, that's why you pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty. But Reish Lakish is now saying there's a juxtaposition in the Chumash between slaughter and sale, which means if it's an animal that's a treifa or a consecrated animal that's unblemished in the temple courtyard, in those two cases, you can't benefit from it. Therefore, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment, and there's no sale of that animal because if you can't deconsecrate it, you can't sell it. You can't use it. You can't sell it. And therefore, he's talking about a different example of a blemished animal outside the courtyard. As far as Rav Yochanan is concerned, he also includes an unblemished animal outside the temple courtyard for a different reason. He's saying, look, there's a 4 or 5-fold penalty there as well, because it's chulin, a person can eat it. Therefore, if the thief did it, he owes the owner because he got benefit from consuming it. If he did it and unblemished inside the temple courtyard, he still got the benefit of the consecration. Therefore, he owes the owner 4 or 5-fold. And he also says that in that case, if you sell it, you owe the owner 4 or 5-fold. Whereas, as far as Reish Lakish is concerned, you can't really sell it, and therefore you can't get benefit from it since you can't slaughter it either, because it's not fit for slaughter of consumption. Does that make sense? Because basically, Rav Yochanan is saying you can separate the two issues. There can be a case like a treifa that you can sell, but you can't get benefit from. You can't sell it to a Jew, but you can sell it to a non-Jew. Nothing stops you from selling it. And since you sell it as a thief, at that point you're eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Even though if you slaughter it, you don't pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty because you can't consume it. Okay? That's Rabbi Shimon. The rabbis say something different. There is a 4 or 5-fold penalty for slaughtering an animal like a treifa because you didn't know it was treifa, and you now cost the original owner money. You actually cost him money because he now can't get back his original animal. It could have been a workhorse or something. I mean, a working animal, like a working ox or something like that. So even if it was going to die, you still have no business to slaughter it. You still mandate it. But Rabbi Shimon says very clearly that a treifa, there's no benefit, so there's no 4 or 5-fold payment, even according to both Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan. The difference is Reish Lakish is saying if you can't slaughter it and get benefit, you can't sell it and get benefit. And therefore, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. Rav Yochanan is saying that there is a 4 or 5-fold payment for an unblemished animal in the temple courtyard, because you can get benefit not by eating it, but by consecrating it. And whereas a treifa obviously would be different. He would say in that case, according to Rabbi Shimon, would say that you can't get benefit from a treifa, but from a consecrated animal you can. So their issue is that Reish Lakish is saying anything that you don't get benefit from slaughtering, you don't pay a 4 or 5-fold payment, and therefore you can't sell it either, and you don't pay a 4 or 5-fold payment on the sale. That's all. That's all.
So okay. Only this penalty, the 2-fold is paid, the standard penalty.
Correct. Only the 2-fold is paid. Okay. So the Gemara adds, and they say Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are actually consistent with their opinion stated elsewhere, because remember that the Gemara always looks for 2 things, logic and consistency. Is this rabbi saying same thing in another case? And if not, is he inconsistent, or is the context different of why he's making an exception in a different case? So Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan are consistent with their opinion stated elsewhere. If a thief sells a treifa, what is the law according to Rabbi Shimon? Rav Yochanan says he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Okay. Now, we're not talking about the slaughter, Kevin. I want to repeat the brisa. It was stated if a thief sells a treifa, what is the law according to Rabbi Shimon? Rav Yochanan said he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So according to Rav Yochanan's opinion of Rabbi Shimon, you can't slaughter and get benefit from a treifa animal because it's unkosher, but you're entitled to sell it to a non-Jew. And you're entitled to maybe sell it to a Jew as a working animal, by the way. And therefore, you're eligible as a thief to pay the four or fivefold payment. But Reish Lakish says the thief is exempt. Why? Is that, well, firstly, Reish Lakish says he's exempt since it's not subject to the law of slaughter, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's not subject to the law of sale either. But according to Rav Yochanan, who says the thief is liable, for although treifa is not subject to the law of slaughter, according to Rabbi Shimon, because a thief can't slaughter an animal that's rendered treif because it's the shchita's treif because the animal's going to die anyway, it's nevertheless subject to the law of sale. Why? Because guys, he can sell it to a non-Jew to shecht and eat, or he could sell it to a Jew as a working animal. And therefore the two are not linked, whereas Reish Lakish says the pasuk is a juxtaposition between slaughtering and selling. So wherever you can't slaughter it, you can't sell it. So Rav Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish from a brisa. One who steals a hybrid and slaughters it, or steals a treifa and sells it, pays the fourfold or fivefold penalty. So guys, it's right there. Rav Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish from the following brisa: one who steals a hybrid and slaughters it, or steals a treifa and sells it, he's not talking about slaughtering a treifa, pays a fourfold or fivefold payment. Okay, so let me just explain what a hybrid is, because we're going to get to that later on. It's basically the offspring of a cross between a goat and an ewe. So you know, Kevin, obviously you can't crossbreed two species. That's what
kilayon.
It's kilayim, correct. And that comes from basically Cain and Abel. In terms of that's where the sharpness is prohibited, and kilayim. That's the parsha it comes from Bereshit. So but by the way, Kevin, the offspring is permitted for consumption and benefit.
Gee. Okay, but going back, Damon, but you said, say someone sells a treifa to a Jew as a working animal, or as a non-Jew to slaughter it for himself. He's benefiting by the sale. He's making money. So
exactly.
When you say benefit, is it personal benefit? That is a benefit, a form of benefit. He's still making revenue.
He's saying because the thief gets benefit, his opinion is that Rabbi Shimon would say that there's eligibility for a four or fivefold payment with regards to the sale of a treifa, but there's no four or fivefold payment with regards to a slaughter of a treifa because it's not kosher. So you can have a separate case where there's a benefit for sale and not slaughter. Reish Lakish says nothing doing. That the law is juxtaposed in the pasuk. So if it says if there's a slaughter or sale, which means anything that's you forbidden for benefit for slaughtering is forbidden for benefit for sale, and therefore you can't sell it, and therefore you can't get benefit, and you don't pay a four or fivefold payment.
So it's giving instances of what the reasons for fourfold or fivefold payment are.
Yeah, it's giving reasons why each one is thinking what they're thinking, and also their rationale, how they derive it. You see, Rav Yochanan isn't perplexed and sees a juxtaposition between selling and slaughtering. According to him, it's according to the circumstance that Rabbi Shimon would interpret it. According to Reish Lakish, the two are together for a reason in the pasuk. It's whatever law applies to one in a certain case applies to the other case. So with regards to a treifa, if you can't slaughter it and consume it, you can't sell it either. And therefore the thief isn't liable to the payment. And I'm using the example of a treifa because it's easier to understand as opposed to blemished and unblemished. Because things that are matters in the temple are so abstract to us living today that it's a bit harder to imagine than a case of an animal not being kosher for shechting because it's going to die in a matter of months anyway. That's why I'm focusing on that part. But you understand how it applies as far as the temple is concerned. So all we're saying there is there's obviously a clear proof. And obviously, Rav Yochanan is talking about an unblemished animal in the temple courtyard, and he's saying that initially the thief, when he consecrated the animal, he was doing it for his own benefit. We can't necessarily read the mind of the thief and think he's doing it for the original owner's benefit. That's my interpretation. So therefore, you've got to assume it's for his benefit, because otherwise he wouldn't take it from the original owner. That's what I'm thinking he's thinking. I mean, what benefit? Unless, in other words, if you're doing something for the original person, not to irk or irritate them, they say, "Can I take this for you and have you in mind?" And if you don't trust the person has the kavona of doing it with you in mind, you say, "No, thank you. I'll take the animal myself." You know. So how do you interpret the thief when he's caught in trial and says, "No, I did it for the original owner"? How do you know his mind? Otherwise, he could have asked the original owner openly and said, "Can I do it for you?" You know. So therefore, the default position is he probably did it according to Ravin's explanation of Rav Yochanan, who explains Rabbi Shimon. The thief did it for his own benefit, to consecrate the animal. So in that particular case, there's a 4 or 5-fold payment because he benefited the thief. Okay. Now, as far as Reish Lakish is concerned, he says that there's a problem because you can't sell. He's going the other way around. You can't sell an unblemished animal. It has to be consecrated. Therefore, since you can't get benefit from the sale, there's no benefit from the slaughter. He's working the other way around in that example. Do you understand that, guys? He's saying you can't sell it, you can't deconsecrate it. And since the thief can't get benefit from the sale of it, he makes the juxtaposition on the slaughter now and says, well, therefore, you can't get benefit from the slaughter in terms of consumption or monetary benefit. So therefore, you don't pay the 4 or 5-fold benefit. The 4 or 5-fold payment. So he's saying if you can't sell it because you can't deconsecrate it, and you can, then you don't pay the 4 or 5-fold payment on the sale. So if you don't pay it on the sale, then you don't pay it on the slaughter. Then in the case of a treifa, Reish Lakish is going the other way around. Since you can't get benefit from the slaughter, you don't pay the 4 or 5-fold payment as a thief. Therefore, you can't sell it either, because you can't get the benefit of the sale. So he's using opposite examples to be consistent with the juxtaposition of the sale and slaughter, as to if you can't get benefit from the one, you can't from the other, and vice versa. Rav Yochanan says that it has nothing to do with each other. There are cases like a treifa where you can't sell it. With a treifa you can't slaughter it, but you can sell it as a working animal to a Jew or a non-Jew. He can eat it. And then as a thief, since you benefited, as a thief, you pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty. But you can't get benefit from slaughtering it because you can't consume it yourself. A Jew's not allowed to slaughter it and then sell it as meat. Even to a non-Jew, you're not allowed to slaughter it. It's a treifa. Okay, according to his opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So therefore he's saying, but there's no reason why you can't sell it. Okay? Reish Lakish says if you can't slaughter it, you can't sell it. But with regards to a consecrated animal, he's saying, yes, you can't sell it. And I agree there's no 4 or 5-fold payment there because you can't deconsecrate it. But you can get the benefit of consecrating the animal. And since the thief got that benefit for himself, he still owes the original owner the 4 or 5-fold payment because he didn't get benefit from consumption, but from consecration he did. And therefore the rule that applies to the slaughtering doesn't always apply to the selling. Now, according to the Tanna Kamma, the rabbi's opinions, is that, for example, a treifa, you still have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment because you deprived the original owner of that animal by actually removing its life force from it, just like if you had to sell the animal, which you could also do to a non-Jew or a Jew as a working animal, and therefore you owe the original owner that. It wasn't yours to slaughter, it wasn't yours to sell. Okay, so that's the difference between the Tanna Kamma, which is the rabbinical opinion, and then Rav Yochanan's opinion of Rabbi Shimon and Reish Lakish's opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Okay, done, guys. All right.
Skak, Damon. Sorry, I was on mute.
Pleasure. Art, you want to come on a sec? All right, guys, I've tried to put it over as clearly as possible. I know it's not an easy subject, but I hope it makes sense.
Yeah.
The last 5 minutes, I think, helped. It clarified.
Page 77, Damon, or 76.
We're on 77B1.
Yeah, it talks about the hybrid, the mixture of the U and the what's it? What is it?
A goat and a ewe.
A goat and a ewe. Yeah.
So I sheepishly know you've gone through the duff, and I owe you an apology.
But I did it this afternoon actually.
No, it's amazing. So it's quite a
and I did it when Mark Shaw was here for Shabbos. How's that? Okay. Seeing that we're doing Bava Kamma. Gavin?
Sure,
he remembers you, by the way. Sorry, Damon, I forgot to mention you. He does remember you.
He knows me.
I forgot, Damon, were you